Tonight on NewsWatch, dozens of ships are scouring the South China Sea for traces of a missing airliner. Now questions are mounting about terrorism and airport security. Plus, are President Obama's policies actually helping the conservative cause? The nation's conservatives make their case at an annual conference in Washington. And Vermont's heroin problem, why this small state has a big problem with drug addiction and its consequences. All this and more tonight on NewsWatch. The mystery of the missing airliner deepens. Good evening, I'm Lori Johnson. False leads and frustration mark day 3 of the search for Malaysian Airlines Flight 370. Dozens of ships look for clues with no success, while investigators try to learn more about the 2 men who boarded with stolen passports. And as CBN's Ephraim Graham reports, it leaves the victims' families and friends with more questions than answers.
There is no sign of Malaysian Airlines Flight 370 after 3 full days of searching. Teams are now doubling their reach from 50 nautical miles to 100, with 30 aircraft and 40 ships, including 2 from the U.S. Navy.
It's very, very important that we have to find the aircraft.
Debris thought to be the plane's door was spotted early in the search, but nothing has been recovered. The hunt for the missing plane and what may have taken it down is like looking for a needle in a haystack. It disappeared from radar without even a mayday call.
It was probably something that was either very catastrophic, that happened absolutely immediately, that they weren't able or didn't have time to make any communications.
Experts say the Boeing 777 has an excellent safety record, and they found no problems with the plane when it was inspected just about 10 days before the crash. Still, they lost contact with ground controllers somewhere between Malaysia and Vietnam, with 239 people on board. Malaysian authorities are investigating the possibility of terrorism, with 2 passengers who boarded the jet with stolen passports. They've identified at least one of those passengers, but say it was someone from outside Malaysia. Meanwhile, investigators are working with FBI and U.S. intelligence agencies. CBN terrorism analyst Eric Stakelbeck says the incident shouldn't catch anyone by surprise.
Look at the past few months, even the past few weeks. We've had several warnings from the Department of Homeland Security to look for, number 1, toothpaste tube bombers aboard planes, number 2, shoe bombers, once again, aboard planes.
Ephraim Graham, CBN News.
The government is set to ramp up its snooping on federal workers. An electronic monitoring system will keep close tabs on government employees. We're talking about 5 million federal workers who have secret clearances. A computerized system will continually monitor their behavior through multiple databases. No word on when this sweeping system will be put into place, but it's designed to catch rogue agents and workers like former NSA analyst Edward Snowden, who leaked government secrets to the media. Snowden, who did leak thousands of the National Security Agency's top secret documents, spoke publicly today for the first time since fleeing the U.S. He addressed an interactive festival in Texas by Skype from Russia. He encouraged the audience to guard their online information and to act as watchdogs.
The government has the ability to deprive you of rights. In any country, they have police powers, they have military powers, they have intelligence powers. They can literally kill you, they can jail you, they can surveil you. It's important to remember that Americans benefit profoundly from this because, again, as we discussed, we've got the most to lose from being hacked.
Snowden says he has no regrets about leaking the NSA documents. A small drop in the number of uninsured is being attributed to Obamacare. The Gallup Healthways Well-Being Index finds that about 16% of Americans are without health insurance so far this year. That's down from 17% during the last 3 months of 2013. That 1% change represents about 3 to 4 million people. Gallup says the timing of the decline coincides with the start of Obamacare. And turning now to politics, conservatives overwhelmingly voted for Senator Rand Paul in the presidential poll at CPAC. The annual conference in Washington brings together thousands of conservatives to read the pulse of the movement. CBN's David Brody was there.
The fiery rhetoric was hot all weekend long.
We need to repeal every single word of Obamacare.
Some conservative presidential wannabes like Texas Governor Rick Perry said it's time to start a rebellion. Mike Huckabee was concerned about God's fiery judgment coming down on America if we forget about the Creator. And some, like Louisiana Governor Bobby Jindal, had a few punchlines.
To President Carter, I want to issue a sincere apology. It is no longer fair to say he was the worst president of this great country in my lifetime. President Obama has proven me wrong.
After the speech, the governor and possible presidential candidate told us that this president's policies are helping the conservative cause.
The failures of the execution and the design of Obamacare may be the best argument against progressivism we're ever going to see. I think people are now beginning to see it doesn't make sense just to trust the government to do everything for us. It doesn't work. We need to trust the founding fathers were right to trust the American people, not a bunch of guys in D.C.
And conservatives like possible presidential candidate Paul Ryan were wasting no time bashing big government in Washington.
Right now, the tax code is 10 times the size of the Bible and has none of the good news.
But critics say the news is not good for Republicans because of supposed infighting over how conservative the movement should be. Ryan sees it differently.
The way the left tells it, the Republican Party is in this big, massive civil war. It's Tea Party versus establishment libertarians versus social conservatives. There's infighting, conflict, backbiting, discord. Look, I'm Irish. That's my idea of a family reunion.
But all eyes were on New Jersey governor and possible presidential contender Chris Christie. Some conservatives think his record is too moderate. He wasn't invited to CPAC last year, but this year he was well received, and he played up his social conservative record.
When we say that we're pro-life and that we're proudly pro-life, that doesn't mean we're pro-life just when that human being is in the womb. We need to be pro-life when they leave the womb as well.
After his speech, Christie told us he was glad to be back.
You know, we have a lot in common in terms of what my record has been, and so I felt the reception was great, and I look forward to coming back next year if I'm invited.
Christie's focus is on something conservatives are well aware of, broadening the scope of the party and coming across as more compassionate.
Our ideas are better than their ideas, and if we put them forward in an unapologetic, straight way, we can do it. But also, we've got to go into places and campaign in places where we're uncomfortable. We can't just keep going to the Chamber of Commerce luncheons, and we can't just keep coming to CPAC. We've got to go into Latino neighborhoods. We have to go into African American neighborhoods.
While this conference gives conservatives the opportunity to galvanize with what they hope will be a successful midterm election season, it doesn't resolve the larger issue, and that is whether or not to be a big tent of a party or stick to those constitutional conservative principles. David Brody, CBN News, in National Harbor, Maryland.
The head of one of Washington's top conservative think tanks is calling for states to lead the charge on socially divisive issues like gay marriage. Former Senator and Heritage Foundation President Jim DeMint spoke to CBN News today about how our polarized country can begin to live in peace.
The country is divided today is because the federal government is beginning to make decisions for all of us that many of us are opposed to. Redefining marriage at the federal level is wrong. They don't have the authority to do that. But we have to allow that if states want to go one way and another states want to go another, then that's something that we're going to have to accept.
DeMint also called on conservatives to organize better around issues of religious freedom. He said that hysteria in the media over a recent bill in Arizona forced Governor Jan Brewer to veto it. Tensions remain high between Russia and Ukraine in advance of an upcoming referendum on Crimean independence. Rallies in both countries Monday turned violent. Gary Lane has more.
Pro-Russian demonstrators in eastern Ukraine broke through police barricades and seized a government building. This pro-Russian said, "We're waiting for you here. Glory to Russia." This woman said Ukrainians are afraid to leave their houses in Crimea. She called armed soldiers with no insignia on their uniforms terrorists, and the Crimea authorities gangsters. They might be referring to the new Crimean regional prime minister nicknamed the Goblin. He's Sergei Aksyonov, the businessman turned politician handpicked by Vladimir Putin to help Russia advance its interest in the Crimea. Aksyonov's political opponents say he once led a criminal gang that was involved in extortion rackets. He had a message for the Ukrainian troops committed to retaking Crimea.
We are not enemies with those soldiers who pledged loyalty to the Ukrainian state. They will be allowed to leave for Ukraine if they wish.
Crimean secessionists say next week's referendum will settle the issue once and for all. President Obama insists the vote will violate international law. Former Secretary of Defense Robert Gates says Putin wants more than Crimea. He has a long-term strategy to recreate a Russian sphere of influence throughout the region.
Frankly, I don't think that he will stop in Ukraine until there is a government in Ukraine, in Kiev, that is essentially pro-Russian.
Meanwhile, President Obama says he'll meet with the Ukrainian Prime Minister at the White House Wednesday. Both men are hoping to find a diplomatic solution to the Crimean crisis. Gary Lane, CBN News.
Islamic rebels in Syria have finally released the nuns they've been holding hostage since December. 16 women were let go, including 13 Greek Orthodox nuns and their 3 helpers. Syrian authorities released dozens of their female prisoners in exchange. Another pastor has been arrested in Iran. Officials are holding Pastor Amin Kaki and 2 of his members. Present Truth Ministries reports intelligence forces attacked a group of Christians as they were having a church picnic. The agents beat several members and took them all into custody, holding them for 6 hours before releasing all but Pastor Amin and 2 others. They've not been charged and could be held for up to a month while authorities investigate. Up next, protecting Israel's historic treasures from devastating earthquakes. A powerful earthquake struck off the coast of California Sunday night. The 6.9 quake hit about 50 miles west of Eureka, followed by close to a half a dozen aftershocks. According to the U.S. Geological Survey, people from Oregon to the San Francisco Bay Area felt the quake. Authorities say there were no reports of injuries or damage. Well, earthquakes can devastate an entire city or region in many ways. Depending on the strength and location, it can kill hundreds or destroy natural and cultural landmarks. So can you guard against an earthquake and protect history? CBN's Chris Mitchell reports on a recent meeting exploring the possibility.
The walled city of Jerusalem is instantly recognizable, and one symbol stands above the rest.
The Tower of David is the symbol of it's the gateway actually to the old city and also to the new one.
Museum director Eilat Lieber gave us a rare look at the panoramic view of Jerusalem from the Tower of David. Its history and value are unquestioned, and many wonder, could it and other Jerusalem relics withstand an earthquake? Nature forced Italy to answer that question twice in 2009 and 2012. Major earthquakes killed hundreds and destroyed numerous buildings, including historical sites.
Our job is to help people, of course, and to prop up and ensure buildings damaged by earthquakes.
Luca Ponticelli shared his earthquake experience and what he learned at this recent seminar.
I was one of the experts that implemented our technical procedures to shore or to prop up the buildings. So my mission here is to explain our job.
It's all part of an international project to protect historical sites from earthquakes. The Tower of David here in the center of Jerusalem is the first heritage site to be chosen in Israel for this international project. It's been installed with a special monitoring system from the top all the way down to the bottom. The system monitors cracks in the tower and the region's seismic activity. The last major earthquake to hit Jerusalem was in 1927. Israel straddles the Jordan Rift Valley, and experts predict it's time for another.
We had the earthquake, we will have earthquakes.
Dr. Avi Shapira heads up the effort to prepare Israel for such a disaster.
What we are urging our engineering community and all the national authorities is really to check the capacity of this structure to withstand the earthquake and do something if possible, and it is possible.
The goal for Shapira and others is to preserve Jerusalem's treasures like the Tower of David.
Everybody's talking about the big earthquake that's coming, and we must be part of the academic research.
You know, we live in the Holy Land, and not only the Holy Land, but Promised Land. And we have also to promise our children and grandchildren that something will remain for them to see.
Chris Mitchell, the Tower of David, Jerusalem.
Overdoses, deaths, and an increase in crime among addicts. One tiny state's huge problem. Find out why and what's being done about it up next. America has a heroin problem, and it's gotten much worse in a region you might not expect, New England. Mark Martin traveled to Vermont, where the governor says his state is experiencing a full-blown heroin crisis.
It's a cold, snowy day in Vermont's capital of Montpelier. The historic State House, surrounded by a blanket of white, looks like a picture postcard. Anyone taking in this peaceful scene would never know Vermont is in crisis. Governor Peter Shumlin sounded the alarm earlier this year when he said, "In every corner of our state, heroin and opiate drug addiction threatens us."
Vermont's governor devoted his entire State of the State address, all 34 minutes, to drug addiction. He explained the heavy toll it takes on the economy and lives.
As far as I'm concerned, this is one of the real battles that we're facing that we've got to win, and we've got to do that by changing the discussion and changing the policy.
The numbers tell the story, ranking tiny Vermont among the top 10 states in the country for the abuse of painkillers and illicit drug use. Will Gates, a student at the University of Vermont and alpine skier, died of a heroin overdose in 2009.
I never knew a human being could feel this much pain. It has redefined the rest of my life.
Governor Shumlin says last year the number of deadly heroin overdoses nearly doubled from the year before. On top of that, the need for treatment of opiate addiction has jumped more than 770% since the year 2000. Bob Bick oversees mental health and substance abuse services at Vermont's largest treatment center.
Certainly the growing and significant impact of opiate addiction has been profound in the state.
To help you better understand this spike in heroin addiction in Vermont, in 2002, the Howard Center opened its medication-assisted treatment program with 70 patients. Today, it serves more than 720.
You may ask, why Vermont? Part of the answer deals with how legislators addressed the state's problem with prescription painkillers.
For various reasons, the laws were tightened up on those products and they became harder to get. All of a sudden, we saw a resurgence in heroin use, in heroin on the streets. We saw that it was being sold for very cheap prices to offer people an alternative to these high-priced pharmaceuticals.
Heroin dealers from larger areas like Boston and New York City become suppliers to Vermont and other parts of New England. You may recall the recent death of Academy Award-winning actor Philip Seymour Hoffman, who was found in his New York City apartment with a syringe still in his arm and envelopes of heroin all around. Police call him a victim of New York's heroin problem. In the last few years, officials say heroin use has dramatically increased across New England, leading to overdoses, deaths, and an increase in crime among addicts.
The other thing we've done is looked at the home invasions and burglaries into people's homes and really upped the penalties there.
The heroin epidemic is spreading beyond New England, with lawmakers in nearly every state proposing legislation to fight what is now considered a public health crisis. So what's the solution? Vermont's governor wants more focus on treatment rather than justice. Drug and alcohol counselor Dana Poverman agrees.
In addition to the law enforcement efforts, if we can get to the point where we can provide treatment on demand, that people do not have to wait and sometimes die trying to get into treatment.
State leaders say, unfortunately, the church hasn't been a factor in the fight against Vermont's heroin addiction. Josh Masters hopes to change that. He heads up Celebrate Recovery at Burlington's Essex Alliance Church.
I want to encourage other churches to reach out into the community and remember that we're all broken. We all come from a broken place. People looked past my brokenness and looked at me through God's eyes instead of the world's eyes. And that's how we need to look at people in our community who are struggling, because we're all struggling with something. So get out there, let people know that Jesus cares and that we can walk along with you through your recovery.
And at the same time, help rescue those who have fallen prey to a heroin crisis. Mark Martin, CBN News, Montpelier and Burlington, Vermont.
And finally today, the crisis in Ukraine is shaking the world, but it had a more personal impact on one American family. Don and Lisa Jenkins finally arrived home yesterday after nearly a month stuck in Kiev. They went there to adopt 4 kids, but what timing! They found themselves in the midst of a revolution with no idea when they would get home.
Every day it was like, oh, just a couple more days.
The Jenkins, with 4 new kids in tow, were greeted back here in the good old USA by family and friends who'd been praying for their safe return. They say their faith in Christ gave them strength.
When we would get to the lowest part, we would get a Facebook message from somebody at church or a coworker that would say, no, just hang in there, the Lord's with you. And those little things is really what got us through.
And after their long battle, the Jenkins family is relieved to be back home, and they can honestly say there's no place like home. Well, that's all the time we have for this edition of NewsWatch. Remember, you can email us your questions and comments at newswatch@cbn.com. And we'll hope you'll join us again next time. Have a great evening, everyone.